But there was such a close connection between what they called the radical Republicans, which included John Brown and others, that they thought that he was part of the conspiracy, part of the raid on Harper's family. So he had to leave for a while until things cooled out, and dried out, and then he could come back. But I know I probably went too far afield.
No, brother.
From your original.
No, brother. Listen. We're all taking notes right now. I'm quite sure.
But it's very important. I think that Frederick Douglass is not given his due today, but you have to put yourself in those. And I heard Brother Henry say something earlier when he said we took 2 steps forward and a whole lot of steps back. This, to me, is the lesson of the life of Frederick Douglass. In every setback, he was able to come back. In every setback, he had the resilience to bounce back and get and stay in the struggle. Almost to the end of his life, he was fighting, for the liberation of black people, brother, ask me some.
No. I'm glad that you said that, because what I was getting ready to ask you, what impact do you feel Douglass, as you're mentioning him filling large rooms?
Doing what?
Filling large rooms, large venues. Right. Now, I have to ask you, was he the first one on record to do that? Because we hear about Garvey, Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm King, Minister Farrakhan.
They all came after him.
Right, but when I'm asking,
he was probably
the first one,
the first black megastar.
Right, that's
of
what
the 19th. I mean, I hate to use that term because it really belittles his work.
People.
But he was a giant figure in his lifetime, and it was really beyond. But one of the things we have to say that's not talked about, and that's the role of his wife, Anna Murray. There would have been no Frederick Douglass as we know him without his wife, Anna Murray, his first wife, his black wife. She made it possible because when he first started out, he wasn't making no whole lot of money. He'd get pennies here and pennies there for speeches before before his name was made. His wife was working and bringing home the income that enabled him to go out and do the abolitionist work that he was doing. So whenever people come and talk about Frederick Douglass, they should also talk about his first wife, Anna Murray, with whom he had 5 children. 5 children. And but Frederick Douglass was the recognized leader. Now, I need to preface that by saying he wasn't the most militant. He was militant, but he wasn't the most militant. He himself said in a letter to the sister, Harriet Tubman, that he paled in comparison to her. Just look up Frederick Douglass' comments on Harriet Tubman. I mean, because she was out in the battlefield. I mean, he was in the field too, but Harriet Tubman was in the battlefield and on the Underground Railroad and moving people from slavery to freedom and everything else. So, he recognized that he was a star in a constellation of stars, in a universe of stars. And I did not know this. I had never seen that comment that he wrote, note that he had written to her, how humbled he was, in her presence, because she too was a legend in her lifetime. But Frederick Douglass, he came along at a time when mass media was really starting to take off in America. You know, like like we talk about computers and AI, you know, photography was that like in 1860, you know, and to be, you know, the most photographed person in the 19th century, you know, is written. That's how people, you know, got to know him. But besides his abolitionist work, he was the one that pressured Lincoln.
I was getting ready to come to that. Please,
Right.
please.
He was the one that pressured Lincoln to accept black men in the Union Army, to recruit black men into the Union Army. He, along with Harriet Tubman, Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, and the other radical Republicans. But, you know, Lincoln and Douglas, or Douglas and Lincoln, had a very, what's the word?
Weird or funny relationship?
Very tense relationship, because up until 1863, the North Star was one of the biggest critics of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln wanted to send black people to Colombia, to Haiti, and to Liberia. I mean, Lincoln wanted to end slavery, but when he finally came to that position, because initially, you know, he didn't have that position. He said, if I can save the Union with slavery, I will. If I can save the Union without slavery, I will. But Douglas was one of Lincoln's biggest critics up until the Emancipation Proclamation. Because Lincoln, he was like Biden. You know, he was like Clinton. You know, Lincoln was not a radical Republican. I mean, literally up until, almost until the time he was assassinated, he was still holding on to the colonization plan for black people. You know, that, you know, and understand that wasn't just Lincoln's position. That really was the position of the majority of black people that wanted to see an end to slavery. That's why it's interesting, like, we look at the states that abolished slavery. You say, well, New Hampshire abolished slavery in the 1700s, and Oregon abolished slavery early on. Yeah, they abolished slavery because they didn't want no black people in their state. It wasn't like they had a particular love for black people and wanted to end slavery. They didn't want black people in their state. Oregon was going to be the white man. Well, this country was going to be the white man's land. I mean, we have to re-educate ourselves on the whole creation myth of the United States of America. You know, like, tomorrow people are going to be talking about the great American democracy and the great American revolution. For black people, it was a counter-revolution. And I would refer people to two of the many books written by Professor Gerald Horne. The first is The Counter-Revolution of 1776, and the second is The Counter-Revolution of 1836. Well, you can surmise what the Counter-Revolution of 1776 was. That was the American Revolution. Why was it a counter-revolution? It was a counter-revolution because America did not tear itself away from Britain because, as we were told in elementary school, because of taxation without representation, the colonies tore itself away from Britain because it wanted to continue slavery. Britain had abolished slavery with the Somerset case in 1772. The British were ending, I think they were moving to abolish slavery. And this was alarming the slave masters in this country. And brothers and sisters, if you have any doubt that this was a slave master's country and was established to be so, Just look up who were the signatories of the Declaration of Independence. There were 56 signatories of the Declaration of Independence. 41 of them were slave masters, including the one that wrote the Declaration was a slave master. The other day, and let you answer that question.
Please,
the other day,
he's burning.
The other day, Pop was having a demo. What were we having the demonstration? We were having the Juneteenth demonstration. Right? We was having a Juneteenth demonstration. Everybody's cool. We going along. It's hot as hell. We trying to get this thing over with so we all get out the sun. This white man, we've been doing demonstrations for 50 years. I mean, we count POP, that's 42 years. If we go all the way back to 1971, 53 years we've been doing demonstrations. Ain't no white people ever tried to break up our demonstration. Show you how things are changing. This one white man by himself, he thought himself bold enough. And he wasn't even like a young white man. Like, might be able to box or do some martial arts or something. This old white man looked like a college professor with his shoulder bag tried to shout me down when I was telling people that George Washington was a slave master. I said, George Washington, he got a liar. But Washington was a slave master. He was the biggest slave master in Virginia. Him and his wife, he had 100 and some odd slaves. His wife had 100 and some odd slaves. When they got married together, they had 317 slaves. He was one of the biggest slave masters in the colonies. And of the 41 people that signed the Declaration that were slave masters, remember 41 of 56 is almost 3/4. Of the 41, there were 5 who signed the Declaration who were from New Jersey. And all 5 of the New Jersey signatories were slave masters. All 5 of them. This nation tore itself from Great Britain because in 1763, King George had issued a proclamation about the Indian Wars in the United States. He was like, y'all got to calm this down. Because Britain had to come and send troops. Every time there was an Indian war, they had to send troops. He was like, y'all got to calm down. So you had George Washington on the one hand enslaving black people, and on the other hand stealing Native American land. This is why Frederick Douglass, in his speech in 1852, said this country was guilty. This is, I think, a quote. This country is guilty of crimes that would shame a nation of savages. That's what he said. And imagine this. He said this we weren't even emancipated. He was talking trash. He's like, no. Y'all are guilty of the worst crimes. And there's a book out now called Half the Story Has Never Been Told about it. And, which is true. We don't know half the story. I remember when I was doing my student practicum, because I am a licensed social studies teacher. When I was doing my practicum at Weequahic High School, that's when Roots came out. Remember Roots? Roots came out, right? Roots came out. And everybody was crying about how terrible black people were. Roots didn't show you half the problem of slavery. If black people knew the truth of slavery, this country would turn upside down.
Now, Mr. Ham, let me interject. May I interject? There's another movie. I'm going to let you continue. Brother Henry, this is Brother Minister Lawrence Ham. Anyway, there's a movie, and I'm sure Queen Mother Amaka, who's sitting here, remembers a movie that was banned in the 70s called Goodbye, Uncle Tom. which made Roots look like a carnival, but I'll let you continue.
Right. No, I don't want to go far afield from your question,
but please, yes, you're good.
You know, we have to unlearn a lot of stuff. Like when I was a kid, right, at South 17th Street School, I was in that proverbial play, Vice Chairman. I was in that play. I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down the cherry tree. I was in that play. There really was a play. I was in it, and I was George Washington. And I was on the stage. I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down the cherry tree. Nobody tells you that Washington was given his first enslaved person at 11 years old. He was a slave master from the age of 11. And do you know what his name was amongst the Native Americans before the American Revolution? It was Village Destroyer. Because in addition to enslaving black people, he was part of the effort to remove the indigenous people from the land so the colonists could get more and more land. We have to unlearn all this stuff. In his book, the second book I mentioned, 1836,
Dr.
right?
Dr. Horn, still on Dr. Horn.
The counter-revolution of 1836.
Yes.
You know, which takes place at the time of the Civil War, and is a few years after that speech that was given in 1852. You know, I went to Texas, right? And you know, I went on a job trip, right? I was down in Texas. I was in Austin, right? Is that where the Alamo is? I was in Austin, Texas. You know, and I said, well, I want to go to the Alamo, right? So I went to the Alamo, and the Alamo wasn't big as this room. It had some skeletons on the wall, some, you know, cattle horns and skins and everything. And it just took me back to when I was a kid. I don't know how many of y'all used to watch the Walt Disney Hour, you know, when you were kids, right? And one of the shows was Davy Crockett. And they had a guy playing Davy Crockett named Fess Parker. Y'all remember Fess Parker? And one year he was Davy Crockett, the other year he was Daniel Boone, right? And I thought about when I was a kid, you know, I wanted a Davy Crockett hat. You know, I don't know why, but I wanted all these hats. I wanted a Davy Crockett, a coonskin hat with a tail on it. And I told my mother, I said, Ma, I want a coonskin cap. She took me downtown to Bamberger's. This is true. I know y'all think I'm making it up, but this really is true. Took me down to Bamberger's, downstairs where they sold the toys, and got me a coonskin hat. Because I wanted to be Davy Crockett. Because Davy Crockett was at the Alamo. And remember, Davy Crockett had all them TV shows, they all had a gimmick, right? So Davy Crockett, no, that was the other one, that was Jim Bowie. But I wanted a coonskin hat. Davy Crockett was a slave master. Davy Crockett had slaves. Daniel Boone had slaves. I mean, we kids, right? We watching this and we looking up, these are heroes. All them people at the Alamo, they were fighting the Mexicans because they wanted to preserve slavery. I'm sitting there watching the TV and watching the attack on the Alamo, and I'm rooting for, come on, Davy Crockett. Come on. I should have been rooting for the Mexicans. Blow them away. Santa Ana, you know. And then it was so racially stereotypical, they made the Mexicans all the time, they was fat and slow and everything else. So racist, right? Texas tore itself from Mexico because it